Thank you, Mike and Chris. Chris had mentioned that we operate in an agile fashion here, and that was a transformation that we went through over the last 2 years. We were a pretty traditional waterfall shop not that long ago, and our next speaker, Asch, was instrumental in that transformation. He's led that transformation to many companies, but he led that here over the last 2 years, and he's going to talk a little bit about how that syncs up with what we do with Drupal.
Thanks, Rob. I'm going to speak softly because I'm a loud talker, so with the microphone, it won't work. Exactly. So, as Rob said, I'm Asch. I'm really responsible for the process we use to build our products on our platform. And as Angie was saying, a lot of what I do, we have very similar types of things we do, because part of what I do with Agile and the process we use is building a community and a culture around working together. And so I've been working with people doing Drupal projects for many years now, and I've always been struck by the fact that the Agile philosophy that we'll talk about a little bit now is very, very much like the Drupal philosophy, where there's a community and there's a lot of collaboration and communication between people, and those things actually go very well together. So I don't know if this is going to be a little strange example, but do people know what a Ferrari Enzo is? A lot of people? I don't know if everyone does, but for people who don't know, it was a very, very limited edition Ferrari that was very, very fast and very, very expensive. And they made, I don't know, 10 or 20 of them. And this was about 10, 15 years ago they made this, and they're going to have its successor shortly. But the point of the Ferrari Enzo is extremely powerful. It's basically a race car, Formula One car for the street, which is very, very fast. Right now, after the 10 years they've been out, or 15 years they've been out, and the 20 they built, there are about 2 or 3 left. And the reason is people got in them and thinking that, well, why not? I can afford it and I can drive it, and immediately crashed it into a pole. And this happened multiple times. You can go online right now and look up Ferrari Enzo, and most of the examples you see are people that have crashed. So what I like and what I'm about to talk about is, to a Ferrari Enzo, is that when you have this very, very powerful platform, which the Drupal platform is, just because you have an extremely powerful platform that can do a lot and go very fast and be extensible, doesn't mean you know how to drive it the second you get into the car. You might need some training and some coaching to do that. So in this example, basically, what is Drupal? And this is actually the definition of Drupal from the website, but Drupal is the Ferrari Enzo of this example. It's a very, very powerful platform that we could build many, many very powerful products with. And Agile is basically the coaching that we use, the way we focus that energy and that power to produce something of value. And the important part of Agile is that what we talk about, and we're not talking about any specific kind of Agile, and Agile is a methodology for project and product management. But the most important thing is to know the second line there, which is the goal is to deliver business value, the highest business value in the shortest amount of time. And people sometimes think that's a little strange, and I don't talk about software because we're really building things using software in a very powerful platform. But ultimately, regardless of the tool and the platform we're building on, we need to deliver value to our businesses and our organizations. And that's really what we try to focus on here. And the way we do that is really trying to understand, how do we actually start and follow through on a product and a project to make sure we're maximizing that value return throughout. And so instead of just talking about Agile, I'm going to just talk about a little more about how we've applied Agile to actually extract some of that value out of what we're doing. And that's really kind of the direction we've taken and really what we're focusing on. So communication, collaboration, and I think part of what Chris was talking about also is really important. So part of what we're doing internally, and some of these were questions that came up, the more people we have in the organization that are using or a part of the publishing platform, we're going to really be starting some small groups and some get-togethers, basically, to talk about when in Agile we have scrums. So it'll be sort of a scrum with the people that are doing that. And the goal is basically to understand, what are we working on, what modules we're working on, what functionality we're trying to work on, and to understand what other groups are working on so we can actually help each other internally instead of actually stepping on each other's toes or working on separate things. So the first thing we really do and we really want to understand is, when we start to do a project, and especially using Agile and Drupal, and once again, the community, the Drupal community and the Agile community are very much aligned to actually communicating, collaborating, sharing knowledge. is how do we apply this agility, the techniques and the ideas that we have for Agile to actually extracting and defining the power that Drupal can bring to us. And it all comes to planning up front and then applying some of these as we do them throughout. So we've had many projects in this organization, and everyone here has been part of projects. And one of the things we've learned over time, regardless of where, is starting off a project is the most difficult and tenuous time. Our natural tendency as developers and as managers of programs that need to extract value and deliver to our customers is to start building our product. And what's nice about Drupal is you could really, I mean, I've done it myself. I could just get on my computer and start building a web page or start building a website or doing something. It's very easy to start building something, but we're in a really large organization and we have some really important goals that we have to achieve. So the agility in me says, wait, before we start building, let's think about what we're doing first. So let's define some of these things better. So what we do when we start projects now, and some people have experienced this recently, is we want to have a really great understanding of the goals and the vision and the value we're trying to get out of what we're building. So we define our business goals. What are we trying to achieve? Are we trying to achieve just putting our site on a new platform? Do we want more visitors to the site? Are we trying to create a new brand? Whatever it is, we want to start defining that. And we want to start thinking about these things from the perspective of our business and our users. One of the things we like to do up front is define the personas of the system that we're actually building. So, of course, we know there are customers, there are end users, there are people going to our website. So we want to describe those people and make sure we understand what types of people we're trying to attract to our website, who are we actually focusing on. There are internal users, there are editors, there are site administrators. So we want to make sure that in the beginning we understand those things. I think Drupal 8 is actually a direct response to the fact that people have said over the years that as an editor, using the Drupal tool as an editor is not as much fun or as using the tool as a developer. And Angie had mentioned something like that. But this is one of the things that in an Agile project we really want to get up front to make sure we're building for the right person and we understand who we're building for. Defining what success means, because immediately when we talk about value and scope and time and money, we want to make sure that we're defining what is going to make us successful in this project. So even though we have large projects that have a lot of criteria and we have a lot of things that we want to do, we want to make sure we could define them and understand them. And lastly, the most important thing we do when we start a project is define the benefit and the value. So for instance, a benefit that we might want is to increase the number of people that come to a page or click on a button or increase the number of videos people watch. Those are things that we can measure. We can understand them. We can actually go later and do that, and I'll talk about that in a moment. Value is something more tangible, that we're going to increase the number of subscriptions. We're going to increase our bottom line by $10 million a quarter. So benefit and value are both things we could measure. Benefits have a less direct number. I just want to increase this or decrease that, where value is something that we can actually measure. So those are kind of things that we actually build into the beginning and start understanding how we're going to do a project so that later, when this thing is in production, we can actually measure it. And so we talked a lot about today, and a lot of folks have talked about innovation. And this is setting us up for innovation because besides having a really powerful tool and a lot of time and money, which we don't all have in every project, one of the things we need to do to be able to innovate is the two most important things: speed and the ability to fail. So although Angie has mentioned failure, a little bit today, failing faster, Agile has a saying that Agile fails faster, and that's we want to expose critical issues up front before we get too far down the road so we can address them and either change our understanding of what we're going to build or rethink what we're trying to do. And so part of that understanding is actually getting things to production more quickly. So deploying more quickly and getting things out so we can get feedback more quickly. So that brings us to basically what we're doing during our iteration, during our project. We're a lot of communication and collaboration. If we're not talking to each other and we're not understanding what we're doing and we're not working together, it will fail. And so the important things when we do an Agile process, and these are the things we've learned over the years because we didn't do them very, very well before, is that we expect things to change. And that's kind of the most important thing about an Agile process, is that I don't go into it and Chris doesn't go into it. And when we start a project here, we know we might have requirements, but we know when we start building something, something's going to change. We might find that the module we selected doesn't fulfill all the functional needs we have. We might have to build those. That takes more time. So we have to understand right away how we can actually benefit from making changes. So utilizing our community. Once again, when change happens, change alone is not so much fun, but change with a lot of people is actually better. So we want to take advantage of the fact that we've built a community internally and then also externally to be able to go to actually mitigate that issue. One of the ways we want to manage scope in a project is by value delivered. So if we think about that, the most important thing is when something changes and we say, okay, we don't maybe have time to do everything, what do you really want us to build and deliver to you next? We want to kind of think of what's the most amount of benefit that we're going to get to our customer, and then build some of that other stuff in incrementally later, as opposed to delaying the project or waiting for everything to get built at once and not getting things out to the customer. The most important thing about doing something agile and then really trying to be innovative is to get the product in front of our user, because we don't actually extract any value out of any product unless our customers are using it and interacting with it. So we have this example of all the time, but I'm just going to use a generic example of the fact that if we have something with 10 features in it and we have a lot of this great stuff going on, and it turns out that the module only has 7 of it built in and we have to build 3 more, well, it's probably best most of the time to get those 7 features out to our customer and then build those 3 in later in another iteration. It's likely that they'll only be delivered maybe 2 weeks later, maybe within the month, rather than wait a month for someone to be able to use those things. So that's really, really important. And we didn't do that always here. And this is something we're learning how to do. And understanding how to measure the benefits and the value of something is also how we're trying to measure the priority of what comes next. Because the better we understand what we're building and how valuable it is, the better we understand of what we should build in what order. So that's really, really good. The next thing, once again, Chris said it earlier, I did not collaborate in this sense with anybody else in this room. It just happens to be the theme of what we start to believe in when we do things like this. And so that's why they're very similar. But deploying and delivering often is the key to innovation, number one, but also to achieving the value of the thing you want returned back to you. So once again, getting that out there in front of somebody, much more important than waiting. Years ago, I worked on a project. I'm just going to use the company's initials so nobody understands who it is, S&P. And basically, they had a project that went for 3 months. They budgeted it out for about $10 million. They were building a new subscription service for really, high-level financial information that they were going to charge a lot of money for. And at the end of the 3 months, they didn't have the project complete, and they didn't have anything to show for it. There was nothing to put out in front of customers. And they brought me in to kind of help them maybe do a little bit of a post-mortem and come and see what might have happened. And it turned out that if we reordered the priority of the things that they had done, we probably would have gotten 70 or 80% of the highly valuable features and functionality of that product out the door in the 3 months, as opposed to they kind of randomly did it and didn't think about building complete features and functionality, but kind of levels of back end first and then worked up to the front end later. So it turns out that you really can make a big benefit. It actually turned out in that particular project that they had to increase the number of weeks they did the project. It cost millions of more dollars to finish. But had they actually done it the way we're suggesting now, with understanding the priority of things, they never would have done every feature and function. And that's another benefit we get from doing things this way, is that sometimes as things become less important, they get bumped down on the list. And we have a list of features and functions called the backlog that we use. And so all the projects here that are using Agile build this backlog. And the backlog is just that list of requirements, basically. These are the things we're going to build. It turns out that as things become more important, they bump things down that are less important. And sometimes we see things just disappear off the list. A few years ago, I worked at another company, and they brought me in and said, let's look at our backlog. And they had things on the backlog that were 5 and 6 years old. And I said, well, you could kind of take those off now, probably. But the fact was that these things were the most important thing at the time someone asked for them. And that's a valid point, right? The most important time for a requirement in a project is now. If I'm asking for it, I need it. Every day we delay in delivering that thing becomes less likely that we need that particular important requirement. So there's a function of time here. So once again, speed of getting things out, doing things iteratively, building and deploying things every 2 weeks gets us that benefit of seeing what we're getting out of it and measuring that benefit and value. Another one thing that we're not always great at, but we're trying to be better at, is that when something's in production, we have to see if it's working. So I had a project where we had users of the product, basically, and it was an education product, so they basically had to sign up for classes. Only could sign up for classes by speaking to a person on the telephone. So it turned out when we did some measurements, it took 5 hours and $5,000 to get someone to sign up for classes, which is an exorbitant amount of time and money, frankly, but that's what they did, and it worked for them because they made so much money. However, the government didn't think so. So they kind of came in and said, you can't really do that anymore. We'd prefer if you did not do that. So I was responsible for coming up with a project that basically replaced all that interactive personal time with some forms and functionality on their website. And it would be pretty easy to think that if we know that it takes around 15 minutes for someone to give me their name and address on the phone, we knew that if I built a form to take your name and address, we should cut 15 minutes off the length of that call. And instead of actually replacing the call all at once, what we did was incrementally. What's the first thing and the next thing and the next thing? So they would do some things online, then they would have to make the call, do some more things online. So over time, we incrementally knocked down the time and the amount of time they were on that call. But the first time we did it, we got that form out there for their address. We know 15 minutes, knocked off the call. We could obviously measure the amount of money because we know it's $5,000 total and 15 minutes of that time. And we go to measure it, and only 5 minutes is knocked off. Well, that makes no sense. That's crazy. What do you do when what you're expecting isn't working? Well, two things. I learned this in my early networking days. Check the physical layer first, right? So the first thing we did was, hey, let's check to see if, is there some technical issue? And it turned out that the functionality did not cascade to all of the servers across the organization. So not everybody was getting this form. So it was really clear. Once we got that to happen, the 15 minutes was knocked off the call. But we don't always know. It's not always that simple. Sometimes maybe it's the interface that wasn't very good. We didn't design the page as well as we thought, or people aren't using the page the way we thought they would, or the order of the things we put on the page. So we want to look to make sure that we measure the benefits and the value that we're actually putting out there. The best way to get a requirement onto our backlog is to actually have some need defined based on the measurement of something that wasn't working. And it just so happens if we're doing things incrementally and iteratively in a process that allows us to interact and communicate and collaborate often, we can incorporate change very quickly. So the fact is, if the thing I expected isn't happening, I can immediately go to my team and try something else, because the other part of innovation is to be able to try new things quickly to see if they work. Some might work and some might not, but the faster and more efficiently we can do things and get things out to production, the faster and more efficiently we can actually change and incorporate change into that. That's measuring the feedback into the backlog. There's no question that internal and external users will have a lot of things to say, and as Chris was saying, anyone can contribute. One of the open source things about an Agile backlog is anybody can contribute an idea to it. Once it's actually then turned into a little more of a requirement, and we kind of then see what the value would be of it, we can prioritize it higher or lower, but everyone is welcome to actually contribute an idea. And that's another part of being in part of an Agile open source sort of community and a Drupal open source community, is that everyone is welcome to give an idea. No one, including me, knows the perfect way to apply Agile. So what we really do is interact with people. We see what works. We see what doesn't work. We update and apply the process over time, which is about doing a lot of retrospectives. We really do a lot of talking about what is working, what are we doing well, what do we think we know what we're, how we're doing and what we're doing, and is it working, and are we, really getting good response out of it? And then understanding what isn't working, which is even more important, because part of both of these communities is to understand if something's broken, we need to fix it. And what's great about both Agile and Drupal is that we build improvement into the process. So from a process perspective, we try something new. Hey, this wasn't working, why don't we try that? We know very often the way we write requirements, we need some very specific information. But sometimes, let's say, we used to have a wireframe in there every time, but now we kind of understand it a lot, so let's drop the wireframe. 2 weeks later, we get to the end of the iteration, and it's not the way we thought it was going to be. Why? Well, we didn't have that wireframe. So we tried something, it didn't work, let's put the wireframe back. That's how we do things. We just want to try new things, apply them, and see how they work. Same thing with Drupal. So basically what we're saying is that, sometimes, and I wasn't expecting this when I first started, but this particular product and the particular process that I follow work very well together, and in many ways, when combined, produce more than you would think they would either alone. So the goal of this is really to take that high potential value of this powerful platform and quickly convert it to kinetic energy, right? Products that our customers are using and are bringing in money and benefit to the whole organization. So that's it. That's my Agile thing. So questions?
Do you use burn down charts to measure progress? And if so, how do you do that with, I assume you have a lot of different groups that you're working with.
Sure.
It seems like when you do, they're always adding stuff, and your burn down charts never go down.
Well, the burn down chart should go down. So that's basically how we manage scope during an iteration. So we define and lock in an iteration. So we should be seeing a burn down chart go down. If it's increasing, we know we have some scope creep or some task creep. So there's something that's actually being added during the iteration that we're not expecting. So that's something we would look at. That's just one of those measures that we would actually say, why is this going up and not going down? But yeah, it's quite complicated. I think part of the process is knowing when to stop adding things and when to not let new things in. We do that a lot.
If I could just elaborate on that, I think it's important. Just because we're working and leveraging an Agile process doesn't mean that we don't use some of the same sort of toll gates or rigor of Agile. So we absolutely leverage, particularly commitment, right, for 2 weeks. Everything's free range beyond that, right? You can work outside the iteration and work on something else that's important to you, but the 2-week commitment is something we hold true no matter what.
That's a really good point. I was speaking to someone earlier, basically saying that very often people say they're doing Agile, and they're really not. So Agile is extremely rigorous. I'm also PMP, so I completely get the whole traditional process and way we do things. And the fact is, Agile is a very rigorous process. There's a lot of specific things you need to do and measure throughout the iteration and throughout the project, where very often people hear Agile very often and say, oh, I don't have to write requirements, or we could just kind of code whatever we want during the iteration. And they think agility means there's more freedom or more something, which there is when you're doing it, but there's a lot of rigor around how we measure results and how we do things. So really applying agility means there's a real process with real milestones and checkpoints and phases that have to be achieved, as opposed to, which happens to me a lot because, over the years of going in to help people with Agile projects, a lot of people have said they were doing Agile, weren't even close, failed miserably, and then really had a bad taste about Agile when they were never doing it at all. So that happens quite a bit.
How does a more traditional development lifecycle waterfall type process fit in with Agile, or does it?
Well, there are two different things. Can you align them? You could. But, in our world, one of the things we want to achieve, we need to move fast. We have a lot of feedback and inputs coming in very quickly. And what we tend to see in waterfall projects, not that there aren't certain projects that work perfectly fine in waterfall. When you have something that's extremely repeatable, that you know is going to be done the same way over and over again over time for many years, having that the waterfall setup is really quite easy, because you're going to be in this phase, you're going to need this information, you're going to build it, you're going to test it, you're going to put it out. That happens, and there's nothing wrong with that. And most of the products we build are very dynamic. And when you're working in a very dynamic atmosphere with a lot of moving parts and a lot of change, Agile is meant to incorporate that change very quickly. So it really tends to be an asset when we do it well. Just like that powerful Ferrari, anything we don't do well can easily go into the pole rather quickly. And the danger of applying any process to any product or platform or organization is that when we don't follow it, it tends to break more than when we do. So that's actually the biggest challenge.
Sorry. I had a question about how you sell Agile to people who are brought up in more traditional things. So, like when I talk to managerial types, often they just want to know when's it going to be done and how much it's going to cost.
Sure.
And Agile is difficult to estimate, at least in my experience, because you really flip that on its head. You're like, what's the most important thing? We're going to crank on that until it's done.
Sure.
So how do you manage that?
So, well, there are two ways. One is the more traditional way is that you really have to get someone to really specifically talk about what they're expecting. And then we can estimate it out. There are agile techniques of estimating and planning that we can hit a date. So very often, look, we work in a business, especially that there are hard deadlines that we have to get something out the door at a certain time. And we tend to estimate backwards. So we make sure that we try to have enough time for what we think it's going to take. Frankly, the more we do agile projects, the better we are at estimating them because we have an idea of things. If I'm going in for the first time to somebody, I can actually help them because there are just some tools we use, and we could actually talk about this, but there are estimating tools and practices we use to try to estimate just like any other project. So it's not that it's that dissimilar, it's just that the expectations should be. I don't have this in this slide in here, but there are two issues. One is that 80% of the features we build are never used or not useful or thrown away. So that's in most projects, and specifically traditional ones. And the other part is that when you look at the failure rates of projects, waterfall ones tend to be seen as failing more often, and for a reason, because by the time we get to the delivery of something, it's a long time since we've actually had interaction with the people writing the requirements for the thing. And so, I always ask, how successful are your projects really? Even though, because there's just a way of doing things, right? So that's what we would do. But I mean, it's a challenge for any project to be able to really estimate well and understand what to deliver well. It's just a matter of, using certain tools and techniques and then doing it a lot over time. Sorry, your name?
Yeah. One of the things I think would be really helpful is to talk about when we get to that point where there's a task or a requirement that we have to handle that doesn't have explicit value, like technical debt type issues or security. There's a security patch. You're not going to make any money off of applying the security patch, but it still has to get done. So how does that fit in?
So you're right. There's value measured in value to the organization, and that's the number one thing we want to talk about. But when we actually measure value, we talk about technical value and risk and business value and risk. So I'm kind of being high level today, just talking about benefit value to the business. But in a real project, what we're doing is we're saying, what's the business value of doing this or not doing it? What's the risk involved? And what's the technical value of doing something or not? And what's that risk involved? So yes, technical debt, building our platform to be stable over a long time. Agile, and I know Drupal does this as well, but Agile is very big on making sure that we have long-term sustainable platforms to build on, because we know that when we build high levels of technical debt into something, we tend to wind up slowing down our process and our platform, and eventually our products break, right? We get brittle products and they break. So that's kind of built into the process to actually say part of the time we allot to doing our work, 80% is done to get new products out the door, and 20% is to build and maintain our platform or some variation thereof. So there's always an idea in an Agile project that we have technical debt and need internal. By the way, that's internal organizational value. It's just not externalized, it's internalized. So there's always a value to it. Last question.
So you're talking about Agile. Are you specifically talking about Scrum? And if so, what particular suite or tools are you using? Is this like Rally, or is it some like paper stuff, or is it a hybrid? Is it Excel?
Sure.
Can you speak to that?
No, that's a great question. Well, it's not that funny. When I started doing Agile, which was a long time ago, there was no Scrum, and we used paper and Excel. So that's kind of the thing. But the fact is, yeah, our methodology is based on Scrum, but it's not pure Scrum. We use a lot of Lean and Kanban and XP in there as well. So there's a lot of Agile methodologies. We follow most of the tenets of Scrum. We do the structures of Scrum. So we do a daily stand-up. We do iteration planning, backlog planning. We do retrospectives and demos, that kind of stuff. And the iteration is boxed in like that. But we actually do a lot of, we also do engineering practices, more like XP practices. We're going to be doing a lot of continuous integration. We're building that. We like to use Lean a lot and Kanban to actually track things across the system. And so it's a hybrid of Agile methodologies that we use based on Scrum. And the product we use in the organization to measure it is we actually use Rally. All right. Thank you very much, everybody.